Hello everyone, back tuning into Solar Sunday. So I was shocked to find when I looked at the last Solar Sunday update that we haven't done one of these Solar Sundays since back in July. So it was 6 months since we did one. Last one was on the 10th of July 2016. So I thought we was well overdue a Solar Sunday update, and that's what we're going to do for today's first video. We're going to have a look at Solar Cycle 24 and compare it back to last Solar Cycle and then back to previous Solar Cycles. Our good friend James Ackland's got all of the charts and the information up for you, including the Gauss of his solar tracker. So just sit back and enjoy the update. Big thank you to James for getting all this information together, by the way. I know James will be watching, and big thank you to James for sorting this one out for me. This essentially is all James Ackrill's work, so I'm just presenting the information, so that makes my job a little bit easier on mornings like this. So I'll get on with Solar Sunday for you in a second. Before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all of the pages at GazWebBiz. Have a browse through widgets and click through the links. If there's any articles that you're interested in, you're going to help us to pay for our website, and thanks very much for doing that. There's also video ads on most pages which open up content. When you watch them, you can close them back up again by pressing the little black cross that's on the ad unit, and that'll close the ad back up. So a big thank you to everybody for doing that for GazWebBiz. It does help us to pay for our website. Just say later on today, we're going to have our Sunday roundup. So we'll be looking at the latest in terms of what's happening in the stratosphere. We'll look at the Arctic Oscillation, we'll look at the North Atlantic Oscillation, we'll look at weather next week, 10 days, and no doubt there'll be a few other bits and bobs that we'll throw into the mix as well. And then later still, this video is going to be placed on the Solar Cycle 24-25 page. So there'll be a written report that goes with that as well, just a written summary of everything that we discuss in the video. So a big thank you to everybody for their ongoing support of all the updates here at the website. Right, let's get on with it then, and we're going to look at the solar disk on our side of the disk today from solarham.net. First of all, officially solar activity is designated as very low. Now, of course, although this is the first Solar Sunday that we've done since July, we haven't been ignoring what's happening on the sun by any means, because when we do the winter updates through from September through to December, we always, every week, we look at what the sun is doing and what's happening with the solar cycle. So we haven't been ignoring the sun at all. We just haven't done a Solar Sunday looking at all these things in isolation. But the reason, really, that we only do 2 or 3 a year is that when we get to September, all of the solar stuff makes up a big part of the winter update, so there's no point really doing the Solar Sunday updates from September onwards, because it just would be covering what we already do in the winter updates. So this is where we are going to start with the solar disk on our side of this today from solarham.net. You can find a link to Solarham on the links page. Solar activity officially designated as very low today. We've only got 2 sunspots, one just there and one just there, right on the eastern limb of the sun as you are looking at it. So very low solar activity once again. The GazWebBiz winter season daily solar activity tracker is updated up to yesterday, 4th of February 2017. And, of course, we use this throughout the winter updates. James kept this updated for us every week in the winter updates. You can see what's happened over the past few weeks, right way back to where we finished, essentially, with winter updates, which is around here. Through December, we had really very quiet activity indeed. In fact, we had several days through the middle part of December into the early part of January, several spotless days on the trot there. So a really significant spell of spotless activity on the sun, no activity on the sun, essentially. Into the middle of January, we had a bit of a spike up, and then we went up again. Quite a big push up in sunspots in the second half of January, which actually had the effect of beginning to move the trend lines back upwards again. Remember, the position we're in with the solar cycle at the moment, solar cycle 24, is that we have left behind solar maximum, which occurred a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago now. We've left that behind. We're on our way into solar minimum. We'll be in solar minimum within around 18 months to 2 years. Now, whilst the trend, of course, is downwards in solar minimum, it doesn't mean that every day is going to be quieter than the previous day. So you will continue to spike up some days in activity, and maybe over a week or two, whilst the trend, of course, is moving downwards. And that's exactly what's going on at the moment. So you see back in the end of the summer, we're up here with the trend lines. It's all downhill through the autumn. There we go. Then we sort of level off in this sort of area, and then we move back up again, start to drift back up. We probably won't get back up to where we was there with this tick up, and then the next trend will go down a bit further, you see what I mean? And then we'll go, I won't go up that much, we'll go down a bit further, rather like that, and then we may do something a bit like that, and then we'll go down a bit more, and then up a little bit more, and then down a little bit more, and that's how we get into solar minimum, gradually trending downwards, but still with periods of sunspot activity that sort of spike those sunspot numbers for at least a few days anyway. So this is solar cycle 24. This is how it's progressed right from beginning to where we are at the moment. So we can go back to the start of July with this, or go back to July 2008, I should say, with this. That's where we begin the story of the solar cycle 24, the current solar cycle. Very slow movement into the solar cycle. Really struggle, really slow to get it going. Eventually, as we got into 2010 and 2011, we did see those sunspot numbers moving up. So we get our first peak of the solar cycle here in the year of 2011. I think it's December 2011 that first peak occurs. Then we drift down a bit through 2012 and 13, and then we get our second peak of solar cycle 24, which occurs just here at the start of 2014, and that was solar maximum. That was true solar maximum, double peak solar cycle, and interestingly, and quite unusually, the second peak that occurred at the start of 2014 was the second peak was solar maximum. Usually, most solar cycles, the first peak would be solar maximum. So this peak would be solar maximum, and the second peak won't quite reach that level. So what we did with this solar cycle, it's been a very unusual solar cycle all the way around. It's one of the weakest solar cycles ever recorded. It took a very long time to get it going. The second peak was bigger than the first peak, which is very unusual, and then we've been trending downwards back towards solar minimum very, very quickly. So this is where we are right now in terms of those sunspot numbers. It does put that peak, that little peak in activity that we've had over the past few weeks back into January, at the end of January, does put it into some context, really, because whilst yes, activity did peak, of course, it's still well short of what you would define as really a strong activity, which would of course be up here. So where we are with the solar cycle right now, just there, is more or less where we was around here, and that takes us back into the years of 2010, 2009 to 2010, so really weak activity. And of course we look at sunspot numbers and solar activity because there is a connection between weak activity, low sunspot numbers and solar minimum. There's a connection between that and getting cold and blocked winters, particularly for Europe and Eurasia. Now this period, and it's very similar where we are now to the period in 2009-2010, just here, you would look at that and assume, because solar activity now is similar to 2009-2010, and that was a period where we was getting very cold winters, you would assume that probably we should be in line for cold winters. It's not quite that straightforward, because the big difference is that this period is coming out of solar minimum, and this period is coming out of solar maximum and going into solar minimum. So essentially we're still unraveling what happened up here. We're still unraveling the solar maximum, and it means that although total sunspot numbers now are very similar to where they was in 2010, the effect that this has on the atmosphere and on northern blocking is not going to be the same. The best time in the solar cycle to get northern blocking and cold winters is always at and just after, sort of a couple of years, 3 years after solar minimum. That's the best time for blocking, not as you're leaving solar maximum going down into solar minimum. Of course, you can never rule out a cold winter, a block winter at any point, even in actual solar maximums. You do tend to get colder winters sometimes, so you can't ever rule anything out, but the best time is when you are at or coming out of solar minimum. So just to put this solar cycle in context to the last solar cycle, this is, of course, the current solar cycle number 24, I should say. This one up here is solar cycle number 23, the last solar cycle, which went from 1996 through to 2008. And you see just how much weaker this solar cycle was compared to the last solar cycle. So this is our double peak that occurred with solar cycle 23, and this one is what you typically get. Actually, the first peak, which occurred in 2000 with those sunspot numbers, was a slightly greater than the second peak, which occurred in 2002. That's more typical of what you tend to see with a double peak solar maximum. And then, of course, the gradual descent down into solar minimum took a long time to get there, but eventually we did arrive around 2005, 2006 into the start of solar minimum. True solar minimum occurred 2007, 2008, and then of course the very, very slow, gradual lift up in sunspot activity till we reach our double peak. And again, the second peak was bigger than the first peak, which is unusual. The double peak of 2011, and then true solar maximum in 2014, after which we moved downwards in activity. And I suppose where we are now in terms of solar cycle 24, if we were to compare this back to the last solar cycle, where again we're coming out of solar maximum, heading into solar minimum, where we are would be somewhere around here, I would have think, and that's around 2005, 2006. And when we did the winter updates, the winter forecast, of course 2005, 2006 was showing up as quite a decent analogue actually for this winter. And I'll have more about this in a week or two's time, but I do think the way this winter has progressed, with most of the cold weather being, we're off on a bit of a tangent, it's not really relevant to Solar Sunday, but the way this winter has progressed, 2016-17, in terms of the cold weather being in the east and the southeast of Europe, I think that is very similar to how those winters 2005, 05, 06 occurred, so 04, 05 and then 05, 06. Very similar type patterns this year, I think, with this winter compared to those winters. And it's quite interesting that where we are with this solar cycle now is roughly where we was around the middle of the last decade. So that's quite interesting how that has worked out, and it might mean that the effects that we're seeing at the moment as we're unraveling the solar maximum going into solar minimum might mean when we get to solar minimum in a couple of years' time, we if we continue to go along with the connection to the last solar cycle, might mean that in a couple of years' time the winters have a better chance of being colder. And perhaps off on a bit of a tangent on that one, but I do think that when you get very cold weather in the east and the southeast of Europe, at roughly this kind of point in the solar cycle, can be kind of a sign of where things are going to go as you move ahead into subsequent winters. So the atmosphere, nature, the weather could just be giving us a little bit of a heads up to start preparing for colder conditions, I think, over the next few winters. Initially, that's for Europe, particularly Eastern Europe. Eventually, that could well be for Western Europe as well. So anyway, quite interesting how that has married up. In terms of solar flux, this is essentially the noise that's coming out of the sun. We see again everything is moving downwards. Again, we're comparing solar cycle 23 just here, solar cycle 24 just here. So you see how much more intense the solar flux was for solar cycle 23 compared to what we have seen for solar cycle 24. And again, solar flux is all going downwards as both sunspot numbers decline, so does the noise coming out of the sun. And again, where we are with solar flux being around here is probably where we was around here maybe, so that's taking us to around 2005, 2006, that sort of area, maybe more up there actually. But this is how true solar flux looks through the true solar minimum. Comparing that to past solar cycles, we can see that we have had a really, really weak solar cycle for number 24. So these are all of the solar cycles going right way back to number 1, which is in the 1700s. So we've got the strongest solar cycle of all, which is this one just here, and I think that is probably solar cycle number 19, which I think occurred in the 1950s. And our weakest solar cycle is this one just here, and that is solar cycle number 6. Where we are with solar cycle 24 is this red line just here. I hope you make that one out, and again it is very much on the weaker side of these solar cycles. We're down here as opposed to being up here, and most of the solar cycles are up there actually. So we have gone against trend all the way through solar cycle 24, both in terms of how slow we was coming out to solar minimum. All the solar minimums are just there, so how slow we are coming out to solar minimum is very much unusual compared to all the other solar cycles, or most of the other solar cycles. Our solar maximum was very weak. Again, most of the solar maximums were much stronger. And then the way we've gone down very, very quickly back towards solar minimum, also quite unusual, with very few of the solar cycles going down there that quickly. Most of them have a slower descent. So again, we are very much on the weaker side with solar cycle 24 of all of those solar cycles, which we know anyway, it certainly is probably the weakest solar cycle for 100 years. It may actually have been the weakest solar cycle since going back into the 1800s. We possibly have even been weaker than solar cycle number 12, which was from 1878 to 1890, and that's the one we've been running really quite close to. So this is the chart of the weakest of the solar cycles, so we can see how this one compares to those weaker solar cycles. We've got number 5 and number 6. They're the two Dalton minimum solar cycles occurring back at the start of the 1800s. Then we've got number 12. That's the one I'm talking about, going from 1877, I think, to 1890. Been running very closely to that one. And then we've got solar cycles 14 and 16, and then a long gap from solar cycle 16 down to the latest, number 24, indicated by the red line. So the very weakest solar cycle, in terms of the maximum anyway, is quite clearly solar cycle number 6. That occurs in the early part of the 1800s. Our solar maximum has been very much on a par with number 12, as I said. That's the pink line just there. You can see the way both of those solar cycles lifted up number 12 and number 24, red and pink, lifted up and get to the first peak of the solar maximum, or first peak of solar cycle, which occurs there, and then the second peak, which occurs there. And then the way we've gone downwards has been very similar as well with solar cycle 12 and 24. The difference really is that you'll notice that the maximum that occurred with number 12 is up here, and the maximum that occurred with number 24 is just here. So solar cycle 24 actually had a very slightly weaker solar maximum compared to number 12. And then the way we've moved down into solar minimum has generally been quicker, actually, with number 24, the current solar cycle going down there, compared to a rather slower descent with number 12. So once you average it all out, I suspect actually solar cycle 24, the current solar cycle, has been a little bit weaker overall than solar cycle number 12. So beyond that, you're possibly going back to, let's say, solar cycle number 5 and 6 to find weaker solar cycles than number 24. It certainly has been a very, very unusually weak solar cycle, this one. In fact, we can compare the two solar cycles a little bit more with this chart. This is comparing number 12 and number 24. Again, you see the way the two solar cycles lifted up into solar maximum was very similar. So we come out of the solar minimum, both of the solar cycles just there, lift up into the solar maximums, double peak, with the second peak being weaker than the first peak. That's interesting. Very much a connection there. And then moving down into solar minimum. Again, very similar the way both of the solar cycles did that. But as I was explaining, number 24, the current solar cycle, has actually moved down towards solar minimum quicker than number 12 did, and also number 12 had a slightly stronger solar maximum compared to number 24. So averaging it all out, although yes, we are still continue to align very similarly between these two solar cycles, but averaging it all out, I suspect solar cycle number 24 has been slightly weaker than solar cycle number 12. Now, the next solar cycle, of course, number 25, has been causing a lot of interest, whether we're going to continue with these very weak solar cycles, whether we're going to continue with the very weak solar cycle that we started with 24, and have another really weak one for 25. A little bit of news for solar cycle 25. No official forecast yet. Very late now with those to come in from agencies such as NASA. I would suspect they'll be appearing this year. We are well past solar maximum. That's normally the point where they start producing forecasts for the next solar cycle. Well past solar maximum now, so I would have thought it can't be much longer before we're going to get some official forecasts. Of course, we have had a few unofficial forecasts from various scientists, solar scientists, predicting as weak or perhaps even weaker sunspot numbers for solar cycle 25. But as I say, nothing official yet from agencies such as NASA. I keep looking for you. As soon as they appear, I'll let you know. But we have got a little bit of news for solar cycle 25. In that we possibly had, or probably, most certainly, have had our first sunspots of solar cycle number 25. This one just here looks very insignificant. On the 19th of December 2016. That quite possibly is the very first sunspot of solar cycle number 25. And we see again on the 20th, it's over here, a little bit bigger than on the 20th. It's in the southern hemisphere, and that's normally the place where sunspots will begin for the next solar cycle. Around this point in the dying solar cycle, if you like, you're looking to the southern hemisphere to begin to see the first spots appearing for the next cycle. So that possibly is the beginning of solar cycle number 25, can you believe? Although we are a long way from solar minimum, well, say a long way, around 2 years, 18 months to 2 years from solar minimum. Nevertheless, there is an overlap between the solar cycles, so it's always very difficult actually to know quite where one solar cycle dies and another solar cycle is reborn or is born. But that possibly is the very beginnings of solar cycle number 25, and that's the big one. That's one everybody is wondering about and thinking, is this, if we get another really weak solar cycle after 24, with solar cycle 25, is that going to be the one that will definitively give us our answer in terms of, don't often mention this, but in terms of climate change / global warming? Because if we have another really weak solar cycle with number 25, as we've had with number 24, you would suspect by then, if it is true that sunspot solar activity affects the planet, is the main driver of the temperature changes that go on the Earth, you would suspect that if another really weak solar cycle comes along, number 25, it should start to pull down the temperature of the Earth. And if it doesn't, then I think we can definitively once and for all say that it is greenhouse gases that are the primary driver of the temperature changes that we've had in the 20th century. Conversely, though, if the temperature of the Earth does begin to move downwards, if we have another really weak solar cycle, number 25, then we may have to start thinking a little bit more, scientists may have to start thinking a little bit more about whether the sun and the sun's activity is a little bit more influential than those greenhouse gases. So, lots of questions to be answered with solar cycle number 25. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens over the next few years as we leave number 24 and go into number 25. I say it really will be very, very fascinating to see what's going to happen. So that's it. That's our first Solar Sunday of the year. There will be at least one more this year, probably two more actually, if I can get it in. Hopefully I'll do one in the spring and one in the summer for you, and hopefully by the time we get through to the summer we might have some actual official forecasts for solar cycle number 25. Let's hope we do. Come back later on this afternoon for our Sunday roundup. We'll be looking at the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Arctic Oscillation, what's happening in the stratosphere, what weather's going to be doing over the next week to 10 days, and more as well. And this video is going to be placed on the Solar Cycle 24-25 updates page with a written report just going over everything that we've discussed. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.